You ever just not know how to start a script, a paper, or some other written thing that generally needs an introduction? Sometimes the topic you want to write about is just so absurd that thinking of a good way to segue into it is as much of a challenge as creating the other 99% of the script. I mean, after all, how exactly are you supposed to open a video about a game series that begins the hilariously low-quality escapades of a girl who works at a store and ends up getting down with multiple gods and fighting a planet-sized clone of herself in a battle of wits and tits to save the Earth from destruction, but also had a massive ripple effect on the VN and eroge industry of staff who later worked on multiple genre and industry-defining titles, and ties to a major 90s Japanese political event that changed the landscape of erotic media forever? I guess that's how. Developed by Heartsoft, the company perhaps best known outside of Japan for aiding in the development of Cobra Mission, one of the first Japanese PC games to be localized into English, Ayayo-san is a series of 5 short games released between 1989 and 1994, focusing on one Ayayo Sawashima, following her adventures through some of the most over-the-top and absurd scenarios imaginable, alongside her friend Tomoko. On the surface, it looks like any other forgettable eroge from the time, exploring enough fantasies to make my Danboru search history blush, coming from a company that is practically unknown outside of Japan, and existing exclusively on Japanese home computers before vanishing after the mid-90s, only kept alive for a handful of ports to modern Windows. But I implore you to stick with my ramblings for just a moment, or, a couple. Because if you dig beyond that shallow surface, what you end up finding is a complicated series. Not necessarily because the games themselves have deep lore and themes, though they certainly are hard to summarize without looking like you're making things up as you speak, or because they're some of the most ludicrous and unabashedly wild rides you'll ever see in the genre, though that's the case too. More than those, it's rather because each of the games function as a snapshot of the VN industry and Japanese computing as a whole at the time of its release, with the barrage of references to other titles, computers of the era, and anime that was popular with that crowd, and because for all of the craziness that happens from the groundbreaking third title onward, they are completely honest and sincere in their presentation and subject matter without a hint of irony, no matter how fucking wild it gets. From a hilariously bad first game that is a shining example of the kind of short-lived novelties early eroge sold themselves on, to a sequel that expands on that further with some humor that's maybe a bit funnier now than when it was new, a third title that goes wholly off the rails and into the realm of pure absurdity, a fourth that indulges even further and makes the last title seem tame, and a fifth entry capping it all off with an epic battle in space to save the universe. Except it's fought with funny business instead of guns. While on paper these sound like a so bad it's good type of affair, they really aren't when you discount the original and maybe the second if you're being picky. Some of the developers were incredibly smart and talented, most evident in their future creations of 2 of the main devs, musician and artist Sapporo Momoko, and artist and scenario designer from Ayayo 3 and onwards, Nagaoka Kenzo. The 2 frequently collaborated together after their time on Ayayo under Studio Kraftwerk, most notably on Sayonara Oshiete, which, along with Shizuku by Leaf, inadvertently kicked the Denpa subgenre of VNs into high steam, giving us Subahibi, Sayo no Uta, and whatever else fits in that genre, because it's kind of vague what qualifies as that other than severe psychological horror, gore, or metafiction. It's the Metroidvania of eroge. And even at that time, they were crafting significantly more tame and serious works, or at least ones that aren't as insane as Ayayo. In between Ayayo 4 and 5, Hard released Welcome to the Cinema House, a title that's somewhere between an adventure game and a movie creation simulator that tasks you with creating film in the midst of a galactic war with your talent being regularly drafted. And it's a pretty good video game. But if what I've said hasn't already given it away, these games are decidedly not as serious as that. If I had to compare it to something else, I'd say it's like if Tales Gets Trolled had less story and was outright an absurd as sex comedy. It's equal parts maniacally over the top, endearingly sincere and honest, and outright fucking stupid, expressing some incredible joy and honesty that nothing else can. And I don't think anything explains or summarizes that better than this quote from the official Ayayo art book. Notorious enough, Ayayo is a staunch blockhead who used to trouble people around her for lusty words and gags. And for God's sake, this is the book all about the story of Ayayo. If you happen to purchase this book, you must introduce it to at least 3 of your friends. And you must tell them about Ayayo, that she is so cute, she is so lusty, she is so beautiful, she is so nice, she is so stupid. Well, that's all you need to do, and God shall bless you. Amen. Well, I bought all 5 of the games digitally alongside the official Hard and Ayayo dictionary, so that's probably enough for the curse to activate, and now I have to make sure at least this video is watched by 3 people, preferably more so at least a couple buy it and the curse can spread further like some sort of mid-2000s chain email, eventually resulting in complete global saturation of Ayayo. So before we're all doomed, just what exactly is an Ayayo anyways? Well, for starters, she's the mascot of the company that made her, the aforementioned Hardsoft. Or to be more accurate, it's a division of another company called Log, who has basically no info online and doesn't seem to be all that important. But in 1986, a couple of the people there wanting to make adult products created the now infamous division. They initially focused on producing CG collections, but soon moved to games, making a couple of decently successful titles like Soapland Story and Kudo Kikato Oshiemasu, most notable nowadays for being early examples of dating sims, since as games they're pretty indicative of what you can expect from eroge of that time. Questionable quality artwork, mediocre music, little animation, practically no substance in the story, but a lot for businessmen to ogle. It's from this point that someone had one of 2 ideas. Let's make a mascot in a game for her, or let's make a game off of our mascot. I'm not sure which it was, as I couldn't find any mention in the official books or on any websites whether or not Ayayo existed before her first game, and none of the CG collections or earlier games I played have her in any way, just girls who kinda look like her. But regardless of the chain of events, Hachake Ayayo-san was released for the PC-88 in 1989 and slowly ported to other platforms over time, and marketed mostly on its level of animation and lower than normal price at 4,800 yen. Keep in mind that back then and even nowadays, most eroge from an established company is priced at 6,000 yen or greater. Hard's own Balancho series from 1990 was 7,480, and the cheapest games I have in my admittedly small collection are 7,800, with the upper limit being 9,800 for bigger releases like Kakusei from 1996 and Tsuriyotsu from 2012. So, for ero gamers at the time, super affordable games like Ayayo-san and Elf's Pinky Punky series were alluring regardless of quality or amount of content. And Ayayo certainly had some sort of quality. It's only about 10 minutes long, it has practically nothing of substance, it has laughably poor writing, the music is absolutely god-awful in the PC-88 version, and the only thing it really has going for it is that the animation it so proudly boasts is pretty impressive for the time, and not something you saw often even in bigger budget games like those of Enix. Animation is something that would become a recurring staple of the series, and while I won't dig too much into it here because there just isn't all that much given platform limitations, it's one of the unique attributes that makes Ayayo such an interesting franchise. The art being animated isn't too shabby either, though there is something that's always amusingly off about it. The plot is that Ayayo works at a local toy store called Omocha, or literally just toy, that sells water pistols and handcuffs. Only water pistols and handcuffs. After a long day getting her skirt blown up by the wind and being made fun of by neighborhood kids, she's about to close up shop when a guy walks in apparently looking to buy something. Depending on whether he chooses to buy a water pistol or handcuff, you get a different build-up to the main Edo scene, where the guy does the do with Ayayo before her boss shows up to pick something he left and is surprised by the scene. Upon her asking, he reveals he actually knows this guy from the local eroge software company Hard, and decides to join in while offering Ayayo a raise while she begs for more. Whether that's a raise or more cummy snuggies is up to reader interpretation, and that's it. Ayayo gets her raise and has a steady job, end of story, roll credits. Even among earlier eroge, Ayayo 1 is a laughably short title. It wasn't uncommon to find games that take less than an hour to finish and are dry in content, but the 10-minute length and the singular choice of water pistol or handcuffs made it stand out even back then. A lot of the games from the 80s I've tried are just kinda boring and drawn out, but there's just something about Ayayo-san. The to-the-point story combined with the weirdly stilted dialogue that's played totally straight, the extremely short length, the quality of the art, and the bombastic music makes this bizarre atmosphere that's hard to understand without playing it yourself. The best way I can describe the sensation of playing it is that it's the same as that of a build-up in a horror movie or game. There's this unnerving but engrossing feeling that something is going to happen, but instead of getting a massive payoff in the form of some scare or big story reveal, you just watch a terribly produced Edo scene and have a good laugh. It and its sequel are also rather unrepresentative of where the series goes. These initial 2 titles, while each having one of the 2 people who really made Ayayo what it's noted for, weren't helmed by Nagaoka or Momoko, with the latter trilogy those created veering off in far more creative directions that feel like a guy just earnestly throwing a ton of ideas at the wall because he thinks it's fun or erotic or funny. Comparatively, the first two feel somewhat self-aware, but ultimately focus on novellic pleasure that, while it may have had some impact in its day, happens to have become so antiquated that it's hilarious to my brain that's been broken by over a decade of influence from the shittiest places on the internet. Back on track, another really bizarre thing about Ayayo-1 is just how much it changed in its final port. While the PC-98 and MSX2 versions are identical with only slight differences relevant to platform architectures, the Sharp X68000 release, subtitled Pro 68K, had all the artwork redrawn to take advantage of the system's higher resolution and greater color palette, and it frankly looks like someone drew over the original art in MS Paint. It still looks like a low-budget PC-88 game, but the way it's revised only further amplifies the uncomfortable vibes that are impossible to look away from. They didn't even try to fix anything that was wrong with it anyways. The poses and proportions are almost a one-for-one match with the original title, and the toy store is still pissy yellow, though they did change what's on the store display and the title screen. This original PC-88, 98, and MSX2 title screen was one of two contributions that Momoko made to the game, as she was originally contracted freelance to convert the music from the PC-98 to the X68K, but because of financial troubles decided she could do art as well, and before she knew it, she went from a part-time contractor to a full-time employee. The end result was this, one of, if not the first piece of art she ever made, and while I get this isn't like objectively good, I mean she even jokes about it herself in an interview, I don't want to rag on it because there's just something special about how wrong everything is in it that I kind of love and admire its existence, including the fact that Ayayo's hair is brown instead of her trademark blue. The reason for that's hilarious too. To quote from her interview in the Hard and Ayayo Dictionary, "I didn't watch much anime around this period and I was blissfully unaware of the importance of character design, so I thought to myself, nah, blue hair just feels weird on humans, and just changed Ayayo's hair to brown." The book calls this the precious brown-haired Ayayo-san, so I'm glad to know there's other off-model Ayayo respecters out there in the world, unlike the people who worked on the X68K version that decided this needed to be removed entirely and replaced with... Well, when I made the comparison to Tails Gets Trolled earlier, I did so without playing this version first and didn't realize something that looks like a TGT panel exists in the Ayayo-verse. All in all, it's not hard to see why Ayayo-1 had appeal both as a show of animation talent in an era where that was rare for computer games, and as Kusoge, because the spirit of people loving garbage has always been strong. So strong, in fact, that we were graced with a sequel 1 year later. Hachake Ayayo-san 2 Ikenai Holiday was released in mid-1990 for the PC-88, with a conversion to the PC-98 following a few months later, and ports of the MSX2 and X68K based on that release. I say a conversion because rather than being mostly straight ports like Ayayo-1 had, it's more akin to that game's X68K version with completely redone artwork, notably drawn by Nagaoka in his first video game outing. Apparently at the time Hard was working on the 98 version, they realized they didn't have someone to do the key animation and rushed to send out a hiring notice, but Nagaoka, who had previously been in a school for arts, promptly responded to it and got hired. As a result of this, however, we got a port that looks marginally better, and also has this weird Macintosh-inspired UI that I kinda adore. It's completely non-interactable. I mean, the game doesn't even support a mouse or the arrow keys for anything but picking choices, but it's still a pretty cool and fascinating reminder of how interested people were with that UI. The plot this time follows Ayayo with her tomboy friend Tomoko as they go to head out shopping after school, and are faced with a choice between going to one of three places: an obscene shoe store, an obscene bookshop, and an obscene movie theater. In order to clear the game, one needs to see all three of these endings, with each resulting in a duo meeting different characters and doing different things, and each about the length of the original game in their own right. My personal favorite of the three has to be the shoe store route. After the two decide to go there, they ask for directions from a cop who just so happens to be standing around and, out of nowhere, tries to hire them, telling them they'd make a great police officer if they could just answer this one simple question, which is some adventure game bullshit that I immediately lost track of trying to read. Upon answering correctly, however, Ayayo is offered the job on the spot before she states that she already has a job working at Hard and wonders if that's okay, which leads to the officer to recoil in disgust and run off, which she just shrugs off as, ah well, can't be helped. Apparently, Ayayo is just too strong for police officers to even conceive of handling, a fact shared by many creatures both mortal and immortal, as we'll find out later on. This route is also where the scenario writer decided he wanted to experiment with puzzles more, so you get the only one in the entire series, wherein you need to help Ayayo find a way to get a nice pair of shoes for less than the 5,000 yen asking price by consulting Tomoko about it, asking the store clerk, getting mad, and driving a bargain in the correct order. Otherwise, the puzzle just resets to the beginning. It's so tongue-in-cheek and low stakes that I can't help but feel like it was intentionally poking fun at shit like King's Quest, but it threw me through such a loop the first time around that I had to pull up a guide. Something that shouldn't happen with kinetic visual novels, but unique oddities like this are just another reason why every Ayayo-san game is kamige. The ending of this route predictably has Ayayo following a shoe salesman into a fitting room that completely unconspicuously has a bed, and sliding to slippers with him while driving a bargain, getting a 90% discount on them, which impresses Tomoko, even though she notices that Ayayo's hair is bizarrely all ruffled up. The rest of the routes aren't as exciting, and I'd even call the movie route kinda nothing, but the bookshop route does give one of my favorite moments in the entire series because it feels like a shitpost somebody would make today. After getting scolded by a middle-aged woman complaining she's gonna be late to a PTA meeting, the two decide to get some food when Tomoko offers Ayayo a smoke. Ayayo, being the completely pure woman that she is, refuses and tells Tomoko that it's bad for her health, who says, nah, psh, that'll be fine, and then falls violently fucking ill the second she smokes. Tomoko, I think that was weed. Once you've seen all three of the endings, you get the real end where the duo reminisce about how good of a time they've had. And the fact this only happens after all three endings, and it hints at both of them having done lewd acts, seems to imply that the true events of the game were either some combination of the three routes, all three at once, or that there's some multiple Ayayo universes with different Ayayos that share consciousness. And with the places the series goes after this, I feel like the latter is totally likely. Ayayo-san Free is the first title that Nagaoka got full creative control over, seemingly because the rest of the studio was busy working on other titles, and it represents the direction the rest of the series would go, veering off of absurdities and mundane scenarios and straight into the obscene, the ridiculous, and the wonderfully absurd, and nothing represents that better than the opening where Ayayo and Tomoko are just chatting as normal about their school days and their winter break until they both slip on a banana peel and fucking die. Not even 2 minutes into the game, and our protagonists aren't just dead, but in fact get sent straight to hell as they're so informed by a soldier. I also gotta say, I love this extremely shameless Bart Simpson pin on Tomoko's hat that Hart somehow never gotten a lawsuit over. But even more, I love that it's actually animated. Yeah, I should finally talk about the animation. While Ayayo 1 had about as much as a studio like Hard could afford to put out on a platform as limited as a PC-88, and Ayayo 2 upped the ante here and there, it's here in the third title that the series' most notable trait, besides how far off the rails it goes, fully comes to fruition: pixel animation. When I say that in this video, I'm referring very specifically to, well, effectively, trying to take the kinds of animation you would see in an anime or any other cartoon and find a way to make it work within the confines of a limited computer video system, rather than any other form of animating pixels such as sprite work. While there's a couple examples of console games with this more prominently than for a single show-offy instance, Yumimi Mix on the Saturn comes to mind, they're few and far between in that space, likely due to the way that consoles required all sorts of wizardry to even so much as display full-screen art in regular VNs, so it seems as if it was mostly relegated to the home computer scene, both due to platforms like the PC-98 being far easier to display high-quality and resolution artwork on, and because of the sheer level of freedom that developers, both small and big, had. I gotta shout out the Viper games here. If you know, then you already know what I'm gonna talk about, but if you don't, then let me have the pleasure of informing you that one of these games came on 40 fucking floppy disks filled to the brim with honest-to-God voice acting and some of the most high-quality animation you'll ever see on a PC-98, all for some B-grade romance and porn. The 90s just hit different, man. You could also see it in less extreme examples. The original Dokusei had it here and there to great effect, and there were other full games dedicated to it like Zenith and Defana by Himiasoft, which both just look goddamn fantastic. But the important thing to note about all of this is that these games were released well after Ayayo 3, and in some cases, well after the series had finished its run. I'm not gonna make some claim I can't verify, like that Ayayo ushered in a new wave of inspired pixel artists and animators, but it would also be dead wrong to claim that the series, more specifically Ayayo 3, didn't have a wide impact on eroge developers and particularly artists. Quoting from Tadokoro Hironari of Cocktail Soft and Ide's fame autobiography, Ayayo seemed popular in my workplace, so I figured, why not give it a shot? So I grabbed Hachake Ayayo-san Free, which had just come out. Whoa, damn, I'm flabbergasted. The tears keep flowing, I can't stop tearing up. Oh, I hadn't gotten this shaken up by a game in years. Just kidding. Jokes aside, the title really did impress me. What stood out was the graphics. There's so much detail. Compared to the jagged lines in titles released around the same time, Ayayo's line art looked silky smooth. The shading on the skin had actual oomph to it. There was even animation to boot. Even though the graphics department was split up into different teams, nearly everyone was researching Ayayo's line art and coloring at the same time. Tadokoro ended up so moved that he actually asked in the middle of a company meeting for Ayayo to be added to their upcoming game, Dengeki Nurse, which everyone agreed to, much to his own confusion, and even Alisoft was so impressed that they referenced it in Rants Free, though I don't have video to show of that since I've focused my efforts on playing the remake, but check back in the Rants Free video where I'll actually talk about that. Another reason that Ayayo Free stood out in the crowded space where the prior games didn't, even if they had some decent success, was just because of how unhinged it was. The character slipping on a banana peel and dying in the first few minutes is just the start of it. Right after that, as the duo are attempting to figure out what exactly they're supposed to do now that they're in hell, and after being pressured to strip and get on a boat by this old lady, which, by the way, Ayayo has zero issues agreeing to, they meet with the judge of hell, Yama, to have their sins weighed. Tomoko just gets fucking yeeted no matter what for no apparent reason. I don't know what she did, but after some bickering over how to write Ayayo's name, her fate is ultimately decided by one question. Did she really jam the clan with some guys for a raise and a shoe discount? If you lie to him, then he gets expectedly upset at her not taking any of this seriously and gets banished to hell for a period to see what it's like. The answer is that it's actually just really kinky. If you answer truthfully, then Yama is so amazed at her integrity that he sends Ayayo straight to heaven, wherein she does what she does best and does it with angels desperate to be subs, multiple Buddhist deities, and goes one step further than any JRPG protagonist could ever hope to achieve, unless they're from Fire Emblem. She becomes one with God himself. Oh, and Tomoko is just on her own during this entire time, so that's probably because Ayayo just forgot about the whole ordeal more than out of active malice or lack of care. In fact, even after you've seen both routes and Yama decides to let Ayayo return to her normal life, reminiscing on the day as just another fun adventure like she always does, Tomoko is still trapped in hell and she doesn't even think about it. Ayayo is the most chaotic gremlin to ever exist, and I love it. I also have to admire the audacity with the sheer variety of content plastered in here, and it's all presented with a comical smirk where you can clearly tell that Nagaoka got a kick out of a lot of it, but wasn't afraid to laugh with himself about the content he made. And then there's the artwork itself. I've praised the animation enough and will continue to do so throughout this video, but even with this being his first title he took every lead role on besides musician for, that would be handled by Banana Apple, who composed all the music for 1 Fruit Free and collaborative Momoko on 4 and 5, you can really tell he was starting to come into his own distinctive style here. The dark and aggressive shading mixed with vibrant popping colors, lines softer than any other games at that time, and one of the things that I don't really hear people mention a lot with Nagaoka, his talent for making extremely emotive facial expressions. This face is just the peak of not having a care in the world, or this one that perfectly conveys that feeling of, heh, yeah man, whatever you say. As this is carried on for the 2 sequels and continually improved upon with better and better art and animation, it all combines to give this trilogy an aesthetic that's unlike any other JPC game that I've ever seen. Even outside of that realm, it's neat to watch it evolve and carry over into the Windows 9X era cleaner than most artists were able to make that transition, resulting in titles like For Release and Sayaoshi that I think are miles above a majority of titles that came out in the awkward transitionary period of PC98 to Windows. It's often not great. As if the game itself wasn't already wowed enough though, then so too is what followed its creation. Just a month after it released and shortly after Hard released their last game under their current president in the form of Cobra Mission, the entire eroge industry was dealt a massive blow not too long after. If you're deep into Japanese games or political history, then there's a chance you've already heard of this, but for those who don't, then here's the brief. In October 1991, a sub-brand of the influential company Fairy Tail by the name of Exite released Saori, Bishoujo Tachi no Yakata, a pretty unremarkable and frankly kind of bad Nukige. I hated playing it for this video. Notable only for a single reason. Some underage kid in the Kyoto prefecture stole a copy of it, which combined with outrage constructed by right-wing political groups and networks such as Japan's Liberal Democratic Party about quote-unquote harmful comics, see Looter and Decent, and the public still shook from the sensationalized otaku murderer who was active from 1988 to 1989, there was a perfect mass media storm brewing that just needed one inciting incident to be set off. The media immediately hooked onto this story, and on November 25th, Tadokoro was shocked to see the company he worked at on the television raided by the police for possessing obscene materials. The heads of Fairy Tail and the closely related Cocktail Soft were sent to prison for a year, the Exite sub-brand was disbanded, and no one really knew what the future held for eroge devs. Hence, the then head of Alisoft, Tada, begged the chairman of the Software Association of Japan to do something about this, eventually resulting in the formation of the controversial EOX, also known as Sofurin. Other people took a less proactive approach. Particularly the then president of HARD was so shook up that he decided to quit the industry entirely, with Nagaoka opting to take his place. Quoting from the dictionary, "Thanks to a certain Saudi incident leaving its mark on eroge history, our president decided we're done with eroge. I said, let me take a crack at this. I'll take responsibility for anything that happens, even though I was completely out of my league. As a result, I became the second ever president of HARD, though I was more like the second in command." The effects of this incident are still felt today. Even in their early days, Sofurin was given flack for bizarre and archaic membership requirements and had guidelines that attempted to, emphasis on attempt, limit depictions of LGBT content, BDSM, sex work, and are responsible for the omnipresence of mosaics. The result of their existence and the reaction to the Saudi incident undoubtedly changed history for the worse, both politically with regards to conservatives being given sway and culturally with the stigma against sexual works being worsened. Maybe one of the few silver linings is Nagaoka gaining control over HARD like he did, as without him at the helm, it's likely we would have never gotten Welcome to the Cinema House and Butterfly affected our way into Sayo Oshi's existence, and it's debatable if Ayayo 4 and 5 would have been as wild as what we got in our timeline. Hachakke Ayayo-san 4, The Sexy Olympics, was released for both the NEC PC-98 and for the FM Towns in February 1993, and follows up some unknown amount of time after Ayayo 3. Apparently, Tomoko got out of hell somehow, and Ayayo's been totally unaffected by the whole being stuck in the underworld for an evening incident, as the game opens up with her giving a tour to two of her school's new students, Yuki Ishizuki and Shunrei Sagawa, showing them around the various landmarks, at least as best she can, since she doesn't seem to understand what half of them are. In the midst of this, Shunrei suddenly transforms out of her school outfit and reveals herself as the main antagonist for this game, the Chinese representative of the Olympics. But not just any Olympics, the Sexy Olympics, and Ayayo and Tomoko have been chosen as the representatives from Japan to fight for the honor and power of their country. After demonstrating her power by beating the shit out of Tomoko, she takes a much more gentle approach with Ayayo by just explaining her history of training for the Olympics and having fun right in front of the school building while people are around, which, frankly, I admire the shamelessness of. Oh, and we also learned that apparently Ayayo has been making out with Tomoko, which, along with the fact that she seems to be having a great time with Shunrei, completely confirms her as the head empty bi icon that we all deserve. And right as Ayayo is about to lose to her, the previously defeated Tomoko comes in to save the day and give us probably the two best facial expressions in the entire series. But with her defeated for the time being, she warns Ayayo that the next time they meet will be at the Sexy Olympics, of which Yuki is suspiciously very familiar with and more than happy to fill us in on the history of. Essentially, it's like a Dark World counterpart of the real Olympics, a twisted game in which countless world leaders have participated in. Napoleon, Genghis Khan, Al Capone, Kamehameha I, George Washington, Vasco da Gama, and Musashibo Benkei, among others. It is, in other words, the most important meeting of legends in all of human history, with many people of the highest classes coming to watch. So I guess it's kind of like some sort of Illuminati meeting, but instead of meeting up to discuss, like, I don't know, world domination, they just fuck. And so Tomoko and Ayayo venture out from Japan on, that's just the Street Fighter 2 map, on the Street Fighter 2 map over to Spain to fight in the most important event of their lives, against people from every nation and all sorts of acts from mundane to some of the weirdest shit you can possibly do as a person. Or in some cases, not actually a person, all with some of the most impressive animation you'll see on either of the computers this game called home. Of course, it all concludes in a climactic battle of Shunrei herself, coming back to where this journey first started with Tomoko being the first pitted against her, but ultimately crumbling against her power and setting the stage for Ayayo to take over in one last ditch attempt to show the world Japan's might. The battle of good versus evil, light versus dark, decided by two very horny women, as it very well always should be. Also, can we just take a moment to appreciate how good this CG is? I have played a lot of JPC games. I own a lot of PC98 games, and this somehow still ranks in the top 10 single best images on the platform ever. The striking vibrant colors, the edgy shading, the gorgeous line work, and the abstract backgrounds, I would get this framed if I could. After the two trade their verbal blows, they jump straight into it with Shunrei taking the lead, almost immediately seeming to secure the victory and pushing her advance further and further until it looks like there's no chance of victory for our hero. Until Tomoko, beaten but not out, appears out of nowhere, giving Ayayo the encouragement she needs to hold out until she can finally secure victory and reset this twisted game. Of course, our hero pulls through, and with victory secured and Shunrei having accepted her defeat, she along with Ayayo and Tomoko only have one question left. What the hell happened to Yuki in all this? Upon which she appears out of nowhere, wearing bunny girl battle armor, and she presents Ayayo and Tomoko with their reward for winning, a mushroom-shaped spaceship capable of space travel. She also reveals that she was actually the grandchild of the president of the Sexy Olympics this whole time, finally explaining her role in all this. And of course, Ayayo is very curious about a new spaceship and wants to check it out, which Yuki obliges, along with letting the other two check it out with her. And then it suddenly takes off, much to the horror of Tomoko, the worry of Yuki, and the annoyance of Shunrei. But Ayayo? Nah man, she's having a fucking blast. She even tries piloting the thing to bring it back to Earth, but accidentally sets the warp drive instead, blasting them to unknown regions of space, and thus ending Ayayo 4 on a cliffhanger. I love this game. It is the dumbest, stupidest, most over-the-top yet utterly lovable thing to ever exist. It is the concept manifested of what some people think PC98 eroge are. Ridiculous, idiotic, and horny, taken to the craziest extent imaginable. Such an extent that it ends up just being even more lovable than any of the titles that came before it, and much of what got shoveled out onto the platform. I think what really makes it stand out from Ayayo 3, at least to me, is the character interactions. And they were fun there and certainly laid the groundwork for what we'd see going forward of Ayayo and Tomoko, the former being a sweet, carefree, and empty-headed girl, and the latter being a very relatable and crass, perpetually exhausted tomboy. But Ayayo 4 has the two interacting far more not only with each other, but with other characters, expanding a lot on their personalities, and I think truly establishing why they're so lovable. Ayayo is everything the front of the art book said she is. She's cute, she's lusty, she's dumb, but most of all, she's a lovable blockhead getting other people into trouble, and Nagaoka's knack for writing outlandish shit that makes that trouble a ton of fun, especially with how Tomoko banters with her and seems continually unsure of everything happening but begrudgingly goes along with it, and still doing her best to save the day when she can. Honestly, I wish we had more goofy, dumb protagonists like this. I mentioned it in my Yuna video, but a big reason I enjoyed those games as much as I did, despite being rather typical shoujo romps, is because Yuna might have been the hero of the story, but that didn't mean she was some genius that figured everything out. She won by being her own friend-loving, empty-headed, naive self, and likewise, Ayayo is as fun of a character as she is because she gets everyone into and out of these wild, fun scenarios by virtue of being a complete and utter klutz. Those outlandish situations they get stuck in I feel are at their best here as well. If I tried to describe every single H scene, when besides getting monetized, this video would balloon in size because so many of them are dense in references to niche 90s Japanese culture that frankly flew over my head without freaking googling. You kinda just gotta vibe with these games and whatever happens in them and not worry too much about missing the fine details, though if you can catch the fine details then by all means do. The dialogue in general just expands on that goofy feeling that Ayayo 3 brought to the table in spades, with each character having a very distinct feel and personality. Obviously, Ayayo and Tomoko are the real highlights being the main heroines, but Shunrei and Yuki are both comedy gold too, and the supporting cast in the H scenes are weird as shit and a blast as well. And again, I gotta respect the hustle here. There's a great variety of just outright absurd content that I absolutely love, like this, or whatever you call this, or this, or this, I don't know anything! Like I said before, I legitimately think Nagaoka just wrote stuff because he thought it was funny or wanted to explore some weird-ass kink ideas, or like, I don't know, maybe he saw it in an adult manga magazine and wanted to show more people? I got some weird shit in this issue of Garo I own. I'd also be remiss to not mention the music. I haven't really talked about it yet, as Ayayo 1 and 2 weren't all that remarkable, and Ayayo 3 was hit or miss, but I think 4 pretty much hit the nail on the head. There's a few out of the 20 tracks or so that don't do anything for me, or just straight up sound like Evergrace music, but only in the funny way and not the interesting way, because I don't care what you say, this shit bangs. But generally, Banana Apple and Sapporo Momoko did a fantastic job here, and the tracks reused from Ayayo 3 are all the good ones. Speaking of good things, did you know that all of my patrons and the people who make one-time donations are awesome people? Well, I can't say I was expecting to need to re-upload a video, but I guess it was kind of inevitable I was going to get hit by YouTube at some point. If you're someone who hasn't seen this before, hello! Hopefully you've been enjoying this look back at a very bizarre and wonderful series of games. And if you're an old viewer, hopefully the changes to the video here and there have made this rewatch a fun and interesting endeavor. Regardless of whether you've seen this before, thank you for watching me, and thank you for supporting my work even when YouTube doesn't want to. Before I move on to any new updates, let me just recap what I talked about in the original Patreon segment here. This video turned out way longer than I meant it to, because I thought these games would just be a cute and fun and short little adventure and not take that much time to talk about, and then all of the other shit that tied into them way blew the length of this out of proportion and led to a rather strenuous production cycle, not least because I took a couple days off to go to Colossal Con as a break in the middle of it. It was totally worth it though. It was my first con, I got to be dressed up in my shitty Aki Hatono cosplay I bought online, played some neat arcade games, bumped into artists I adored and got prints, bought all of the Nadesco on VHS, the physical release of Evenical in English, and this horrible Gundam FPS on the 360. You know, maybe if I get big enough, I can get sponsored together with something like AX 2023. A woman can dream, right? I guess I can also dream that their carbon levels aren't dangerous. But anyways, I'll just repeat this bit word from the original Patreon segment. I also want to thank Castell again for being a massive, huge help with research here. They provided translations, just as with the Dokusei video, and a lot of extra history on the Saudi incident, and leads on where and how these games tie into other parts of VN history. Again, follow them on Twitter and support them however you can. They are good people. Same for their partner Len, who seriously kickstarted my interest in this wacky series and also helped with research and history, as well as some of the memes you see in this video. They do wonderful art and video editing and deserve your support too, so please at least give them a follow on Twitter if you use that site and promote their work. I also want to shout out a few people here since I have the time and want to use my newfound subscriber base for good. If you like my looks at visual novels and particularly dating sims, then please check out Bop Saga's channel. She does great dives into all sorts of old titles you have likely never heard of, including odd ones that I am not nearly well versed enough to dive into, like some old yaoi games and South Korea exclusive titles. Also, Lee-san's videos on the key anime adaptations are still sitting at under 1k views each, which frankly makes me a bit sad because I really enjoyed them as I was working on my Canon video, and I think they're genuinely worth watching if you have any interest in those shows. I'd love to see his stuff break that 1k milestone if at all possible. He genuinely deserves it. And once again, thank you everybody for your continued support. At the time I'm writing and voicing and editing this segment, I am at 105 patrons a month, making about 322 USD, about 150, 200 shy of having my monthly rent covered, which is just seriously incredible. Even this amount is just way more than I could have dreamed having in like 3 fucking years of doing this. Just thank you. As tiring as video creation can be sometimes, the incredible support from y'all, financial and views, comments, sharing, and subs, and all else means the world to me. If you want to help support me financially and get uncensored versions of all future videos, since a ton of people have asked and I think it's a great idea, along with a chance to have questions answered in a Q&A segment in future videos, then you can check out my Patreon for monthly donations and my Kohi for one-time donations. I would answer literally every Q&A question I get, but I think after some point that might be unsustainable. I'll try my best, but maybe if I end up getting too many questions, I'll just make separate Q&A videos on a second channel. I think that might be a good way of handling it instead of tackling it onto the end of videos like I'm currently planning to do. We'll see, I'm still trying to figure all this stuff out. But as usual, just sharing and commenting and all that good stuff helps out a ton. Thank you so much, everyone, and back to the show. Alright, let's wrap this up and talk about how this series is capped off with Hachake Ayayo-san 5, Ayayo's Die of a Frame. Released exclusively on the PC-98 and hitting store shelves in December 1994. First off, I gotta admire this title screen. Ayayo is an ultra brain bomber girl, Eternal 17. Tomoko is an unlucky girl, powerful and an unruly girl. Yuki is a double personality of mad scientist and black magical girl. Chun-Li is a professional of sex and sadism, super absorbed in Chinese girl. Anyways, Ayayo 5 picks up right where we last left off, with the gang stuck floating in space because Ayayo and Yuki are idiots. They eventually manage to land and put on some mobile suits, they're literally just called mobile suits in the game, and deal with Tomoko very reasonably screaming into the void and at Ayayo for getting her stranded somewhere in space, until suddenly, abduction! And they get thrown into a mysterious space prison, which only further aggravates Tomoko and seems to have no effect on Ayayo because I don't think this woman is capable of feeling anything but joy. The gang tries to break out, but unfortunately gets caught and thrown back into jail, leading to the aliens to just up and confront them to take someone away for severe punishment. Tomoko ends up volunteering herself for it, so while she's screaming halfway across the hall and playing the role of hostage, Shunrei, Yuki, and Ayayo attempt to figure out a way to get out, with the foremost attempting to calm everyone's nerves by saying Tomoko will be fine. She's not fine. That is, until the racket gets the attention of the aliens king and the four are taken to them, at which point he begins his speech to them by quoting old fucking super robot openings, particularly Galaxy Cyclone Brygar and Galactic Gale Boxinger. Anyways, while the four are noticing all the stuff he's wearing that's seemingly been stolen from them and people they know, he explains in his monologue that he's from an ancient ancestral race in the solar system and has taken an interest in Earth's strongest warrior, the winner of the sexy Olympics, the one and only Ayayo. And it's here that he reveals that Ayayo is actually his daughter, and this expectedly comes as a huge shock to her, who has zero recollection of this, likely because, according to her, she was dropped from Tokyo Tower as a child, and refuses to believe him, firmly standing her ground as an Earthling who wants nothing to do with his plans of conquering Earth. So the crew does the only thing they can do at this point: grovel in front of him to be given permission to return to Earth. Of course, this fails on the spot, but he does grant them a new proposition. If they can win in a battle against him and his allies, they'll be returned to Earth and he'll leave them alone. But if they lose, then Earth is his to control and all hope is lost. The gang, of course, accepts with no other choice, and so they're given a single night to rest and prepare themselves for the greatest battle of all, the true fight of good versus evil, light versus darkness, fought between four of the most powerful women alive, and a whole bunch of alien dudes. Of course, the group comes out on top every single time, except for their final challengers, which Yuki, Shunrei, and Tomoko all fall prey to, leaving Ayayo with one last battle to conquer. A clone of herself, named Ayayo but in katakana, which might just be the most ridiculous series of events in the whole franchise, as the two constantly try to outdo each other by going bigger and bigger, literally going from normal size to city to country to planet to further beyond, and using a goddamn space colony as a toy, as the people inside are terrified of the weird earthquake happening. Unexpectedly, as their competition is drawing to a close, it is once again seeming like Ayayo is going to falter, until she unleashes one final special attack. Her super secret special move, the Rainbow Bazooka, allowing her to secure victory not just for herself, but her friends and everyone on Earth as the crew goes to confront the bastard who started this whole conflict. Tomoko beats the hell out of him for everything, and he reveals that Ayayo being an alien was all along a farce. And clone Ayayo sticks around because, I mean, what else is she gonna do? The crew finds their way into a machine that will finally let them return to Earth after this long, exhausting journey, and while trying to figure it out, Yuki fucks up again, and Ayayo makes it worse again, thus leaving them adrift in space for the rest of time. Well, I don't think I had as much sheer fun reading Ayayo 5 as I did 4, not to say that it's not fun because goddamn this game is great. I do think it's just as good of an Ayayo story, and excels the most out of any of the games in terms of character. Ayayo 4 might have made me love them, but Ayayo 5 completely sold me on this cast and made me appreciate just how far they had come. From the original game where she was little more than your average blank slate who existed to be a tool to get off, to a now lovable, carefree, and endearing klutz, as well as Tomoko being in a similar place when she was introduced in the sequel and now becoming a very lovable, bratty tomboy, and of course Yuki and Shunrei being developed into their own fangs. Playing this and going back to the prior games gave me a whole new level of respect for how much Nagaoka was able to transform the series from nothing to everything. 4 and 5 also show Nagaoka's ability to build stories that, for as goofy as they are legitimately entertaining to watch unfold, setting up fun and creative scenarios with ease, having the characters overcome their trials in very silly yet still invigorating ways, and making conclusions that keep the excitement and best traits of each story ramped up until the very end with a satisfying conclusion. Even for Ayayo 3, which I think is more just a fun barrage of impressively varied married scenes rather than an actual real story, there was a lot of effort put into keeping these well-paced and flowing smoothly, with enough drama and character building to make you love the crew and want to see them succeed against seemingly insurmountable odds like you would in something like a shonen show. Above all, however, what Ayayo 5 made me realize was really what sells this series to me. Nagaoka's Ayayo titles are superbly high quality in their art, impressively well paced, and overall very high effort packages for their time. Yet they don't feel like they were made for anyone but Nagaoka and everyone at heart. As I mentioned when talking about Ayayo 1 and 2, those games are, well, frankly pretty standard eroge fare, just condensed down to a laughable extent, and the end result of that are games I think are hilarious now in a very 2020s irony sense, but taken at face value don't amount to much because as serious products, as what they're ostensibly intended to be, titles meant to evoke a reaction from straight dudes, they're pretty shit. However, from the point that Nagaoka took over the series onward, Ayayo went from Kusoge to something a lot more honest and counter to how damn kinky the games are, innocent almost. They, through and through, feel like titles written without a hint of parody, without any hint of sexist or objectifying intent. Instead, they're just a dude writing what he thinks is amusing or funny without somehow stumbling into being offensive, just by making everything as absurd as possible without winking to the viewer about it. And by making our main heroine an utter klutz who finds what's happening to be a mild inconvenience, amusing, or outright has a great time with it, indulging in some wild shit in a way that I, as a woman also into some weird shit, find funny and relatable. That's kind of why I brought up the Tails Gets Trolled comparison earlier. Like, yeah, both are crazy in their own ways, and that's where a lot of the humor comes from, but at the end of the day, the reason they have the staying power that they do is because they're honest expressions of some facets of the creators. People who think of things no one else would and aren't scared to show that to others publicly. I suppose another fair comparison would be with what exists nowadays on the erotic sites of Archive of Our Own, colloquially known as AO3. If you aren't aware of what it is, it's a site that exists to be a repository for fan works like videos, podcasts, arts, and most commonly fan fiction. It's become the major hub in recent years for people to post a ladder to, and smut in particular seems to have found a home there because of the very lax rules regarding it. And the main thing is, like, very few people are going to enjoy most of what's posted there. I have seen plenty of people who post stuff there that they made exclusively for themselves, for their kinks, and put it on there for the one or two people who might happen to fall in the same category of being desperate for gay shenanigans between two Fire Emblem characters. In the same way that I admire those AO free fics, I don't only ever see a handful of people appreciate them, made sheerly out of a passion to bring a silly idea to earnest fruition. I feel that Nagaoka wrote these games for himself, the 5 other people who would get the bits, and the rest of the audience who would find his honesty in expressing the crazy things he finds funny, amusing, or arousing to be entertaining as an observer. And I feel they have far more broad appeal than your average fic, simply because even if what's being presented here isn't your thing, and honestly, very little of it was for me, it's just so funny from how wild it is that it's hard not to sit back and just vibe with what's being projected on the computer screen with no hint of self-aware mockery, just appreciation and awareness that what's going on is kinda silly. These games feel as if they were made with no particular concern of capital, of profit, of anything other than humans doing one of the things they're best at, telling really damn weird stories, and that is why these games stand out so much to me, because it's all of this effort, all of this hard work to bring this to fruition, and for me, it stands as an incredible example of people willing to put in incredible amounts of effort for something they just think is fun. So you might be wondering, just what was the legacy of all this? Well, as stated before, Heart dissolved after creating A Hard Day's Night, and Nagaoka and Momoko joined together with some former members of another company, Pill, to create Kraftwerk, the studio that would go on to make Sayonara Oshiete. After that, they parted ways professionally for a while, with Nagaoka focusing on contract work for a variety of projects and a number of roles, and Momoko continuing to focus on music and art, and regularly working with scenario designer and artist Hain on titles like Sui Senka, which I happen to own. It's pretty damn wild. Though it is worth noting that they got back together recently to work on a new title called Geminism, which I am eagerly following news on. Now, if you're wondering what became of Heart after the dissolution, many of the staff joined with people from my days to form Stoneheads, who created... As for Ayayo herself, well, she's continued to have a cult following in Japan of both people who remember these games when they were new, and people who have recently discovered them because they've heard about their absurdities, or were fans of titles that Nagaoka and Momoko worked on. There's actually one particular person of note who's been actively attempting to preserve these games for a new generation, and that's Menso P, who got into Ayayo after being offered an Ayayo-san Kamiket booth and offered a job by a Sega recruiter at the same time. They chose Ayayo and ended up falling in love with the games, going as far as to try and find and document a significant amount of history on the games, and porting them with the help of Beep Akihabara, who currently owns the rights to them. While these ports aren't totally perfect, I would have preferred them to run in the same aspect ratio as the original games. I am glad that they exist because, well, they make these titles accessible to those who don't want to track down an ancient Windows port of the first 3 games, or a version for retro Japanese computers. I might own a PC-98, but I doubt most other people do, and while emulation is an absolute blessing, having legitimate avenues available to play old games is extremely important, especially ones as prone to being lost to time as works like these are. These ports also have a lot of extra features and QOL tweaks that I think balance out any complaints I have. Any version of the game that's notably different from the original release is included as an extra playable option with the accompanying art and music. All of the games now default to progressing text manually rather than going in auto mode, which sucked if you weren't incredibly fluent, and they use a uniform, easy-to-read font that's better than the crunchy PC-88 text in Ayayo 1, and the weird custom kana used in 3 and 5. That kana also broke text hooking support in emulation, so even over 20 years later, it's still cursed. At the moment, he's also working on creating books on the porting process of each game, along with how the pixel animation process worked, which was one of his big motivations for porting them, as it's kind of a lost art now. There just isn't a need anymore for such a time-consuming and limited process in an era where you can display a whole range of emotions using one complex 3D model or a well-crafted live 2D rig, as opposed to drawing complicated moving parts by hand every time you need that level of expression. And I think that's a shame, because there's something special to this that I've come to love that's just vanished into obscurity, just as Japanese computers have outside of niche communities. As long as games like this are being preserved, and as long as people are talking about them, I don't think they'll ever truly die as an art form, and I'm happy that Menso P is putting in the effort to help preserve it. If you are at all interested in these games, then I highly recommend following the DL site links in the description to purchase them, as well as the art books when they come out, since they seem pretty rad from the previews that have been released. I've also included links to 2 books that are absolutely worth checking out if you want to know more about the dev process back in the day. I have mentioned it numerous times throughout this video, but the Ayayo-san and Hard Dictionary is an absolute gold mine of information with release history and game info, developer interviews, concept artwork, and cute graphic design and illustrations outlining the whole thing. Unfortunately, outside of a limited and now very expensive physical release, it was only released on DMM, which basically requires an internet proxy handy to navigate, or it'll run incredibly slow and error out regularly. At least for me it did. The other book I want to mention is Tadokoro Hinonari's autobiography, in which he goes into detail about the industry all throughout his time working in it at iDays and Cocktail Soft, with quite a few anecdotes about Nagaoka in there, as they became pretty good friends thanks to Ayayo. His writings and stories are legitimately just hilarious and fantastic. I can't recommend checking it out enough. It's available on Booth, which just straight up allows you to use PayPal directly without buying points like DL site and DMM, so hell of a lot easier to acquire. Of course, there is the inevitable question: aren't these games all in Japanese, and the books I just suggested for that matter? And the answer is yes. Yes, they are, and I also read all of them in Japanese. They're frankly not that difficult to read, with the challenges mostly coming from the references and jokes. Oh, and they're also rather short, which helps a lot. You can finish the first in about 10 minutes, the sequel in a half hour, and 3 to 5 took me anywhere from 1 to 3 hours for me to clear each, so it never feels like you're stuck on one game for too long. I marathoned them over the course of about a week and a half, taking regular breaks, and very much had a good time with it. That said, I also get that a lot of my audience probably is not able to read Japanese and has no plans to learn, which makes these games sadly a lot harder to access than anything else I've talked about on my channel up to this point. And while machine translation is always just fucking horrible, I can imagine it being especially bad with Ayayo-san because of how dense these games get with jokes and references. I'd love to see these titles get translated by someone who can understand and properly localize all the weird references and in-jokes, as I think the absurd humor, tight pacing, and lovable characters makes them a shoo-in for finding a solid audience here. At least I was sold enough on them to go out of my way to buy a physical copy of the FM Towns compilation just because I love them so much and want to have something to show. It was the cheapest way for me to get hold of the games at about $25, and I think it has the best box art in the entire series. This legit just looks great on the shelf, even if I don't currently own a Towns to play it on. It even includes a bonus newspaper. Finally, the one newspaper that hasn't been corrupted by the liberals. What do you mean it's environmentally friendly? Actually, Nagaoka's work on the box art is something I haven't touched on enough in this video. Dude has a serious eye for incredible minimalist graphic design, which might be why he's been hired to do UI work on a couple of games. I mean, just look at these. They're unlike any other JPC game I own or have seen. Frankly, there's a lot of stuff I haven't mentioned about Ayayo in this video, like the messages hidden in 3 and 4 if you hit the stop key on a PC98 keyboard, the Ayayo Frio Make disc, the audio dramas on the FM Town CD for Ayayo 4, all of the little jokes and references in each game that I didn't explain. There is a huge rabbit hole to go down here, and it wouldn't be any fun if I spoiled it all for you guys. There's gotta be a little surprise left. But all in all, I love these games. They might not be the smartest media, they might be loaded with jokes that no one will get but a few people, and they might have a superbly niche audience thanks to their weird content, but the original two still stand as hilarious games to go back to, and Nagaoka's trilogy in my mind is one of the greatest examples of people just creating shit for fun. In a world where the games industry is driven purely by profit, where companies seek to maximize the amount of money they can make at the cost of artistic vision or even simple fun, Ayayo-san is a shining example of what beautiful, beautiful madness can result from a group of people just having a good time creating whatever they can imagine. And I love it for that. I love the unbridled creativity. I love the nicheness. I love that these games were simply put out there for people who vibe with them to have a blast with and garnered success because of it. Ayayo Free managed to sell 30k copies, which is incredible not just for something as niche as this, but for a JPC game period. So, fuck it. Make the craziest shit you can dream of that only you think you love, whether it's just for yourself or for the other people out there too who love it. These games made me happier than any other media has recently because of the sheer joy seeping through every crevice. So thanks, Hardsoft. Thanks for leaving something for the outrageous computer boys, even after all these years, and inspiring me to want to do the same.